Thanks for watching HCAM. If you want to help create content like this, become an HCAM member. As a member, you'll have access to professional quality equipment and software, as well as guidance from HCAM staff. Come see us at 35 Pond Park Road, Suite 8, conveniently located near Route 3 and Derby Street in Hingham.
Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Hingham Cares meeting, and we have a really wonderful agenda tonight. We have the good fortune of having the District Attorney, Plymouth County, Timothy Cruz, and Sheriff McDonald here to talk about the efforts that they have undertaken and all the good work that they've been doing over the last few years. Along with their regular job, really answering the call of duty to the opiate epidemic. And some of that, stigma has a big role in that work. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about stigma tonight. Stigma around addiction, I think, the landscape has really changed in the last few years. I think a lot of it due to the opiate epidemic, and it has really crossed language, and the use of language around addiction has really crossed into so many different sectors, not just communities and how people in the community talk about addiction, but also in law enforcement, in medical facilities, hospitals and doctors. Gosnold recently, I'm going to say about a year ago, put a recovery specialist in the ER to help assist the department in substance-related overdoses and also alcohol-related events. And part of his job is to educate the staff about how we talk about that. And instead of using words like addict, using words like this patient has substance use disorder, and talking about people that are in recovery. So people in recovery identifying themselves as, I'm a person in recovery, rather than I'm an addict or an alcoholic. Not using words like junkie and drunk, and really changing the language to more of a medical condition, which we know addiction is a brain disease, and there has been great effort in the last few years to talk about addiction in medical terms. Families appreciate it. For those that have family members that are suffering, the people that are suffering themselves really appreciate it, and I think, as a community, that's the right thing to do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kristen, and she will do the introductions for our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you all for coming this evening. We're very excited about our lineup of guests. As Lori was mentioning, we have some exemplary speakers for you this evening, some very knowledgeable individuals in the world of substance abuse and the opioid crisis. Our first speaker this evening is District Attorney Tim Cruz. He is the prosecutor who for the last 16 years has been aggressively investigating and prosecuting the criminal activity that threatens the safety of our children, our neighborhoods, and our community. DA Cruz is also a strong supporter of proactive prevention initiatives. He and his staff have presented drug and alcohol education programs for students, parents, and educators in order to help children avoid the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse. And we here at Hingham Cares are delighted to have him with us tonight. So what we'll do is the speakers will each come up individually, do a little bit of a presentation for you, and then at the end of their presentation, we'll open up the floor to any questions that you may have for that particular speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. As Kristen said, my name is Tim Cruz, and for the last 16 years, I've been the district attorney here in Plymouth County, which includes Hingham. And so I see Chief Olson with us tonight also, who's doing a great job here in Hingham. One thing, when I go out and talk, I'll ask is, does anybody know what the district attorney does? And I'll get like the blank stare. And I'll say, well, do you ever watch Law and Order? And, a few heads will go up and down. And I go, do you ever watch CSI? A few more will go up and down. And I'll say, well, it's nothing like that. But what it does, though, it has really expanded, to the traditional role of a prosecutor, a person who is prosecuting the crimes that occur in our county. And Plymouth County is 27 communities, 26 towns in the city of Brockton, roughly 500,000 people throughout the county. And it's a beautiful county, and I love to talk about it because it's so diverse. We have beautiful suburban communities like Hingham and Situate and Marshfield and Duxbury. We have very rural communities like Marion and Mattapoisett and Rochester, down Lakeville. And we have urban communities also, where we have the city of Brockton, which brings many challenges, and really a lot of our problems that have come from here emanate from there, where a lot of drugs come into our culture. So it's great for me to go out to various places and talk. And it's also really important, I think, for people to understand that, I'm the Plymouth County DA, like Joe is the Plymouth County Sheriff. We represent the entire county. Just where we're at on any given night is where we'll talk to people and go through things. And one of the big issues going on right now is really the non-traditional role, really, that prosecutors and/or sheriffs have to do now as a result of the situation where we find ourselves. And we find ourselves in the middle of an opiate crisis here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and also in New England, and also in really America right now, and how it all started and how it all began in the early 2000s with the prescription medications and how that has evolved, because heroin is nothing new. Heroin has been here. I was a young prosecutor in the 80s. I had hair, I was thin, I was trying cases, and back in the 80s. And now, back then you would see the purity of heroin when it was on the street would probably be 18-20% pure. Now the heroin that you see out there is 95% pure. It is deadly stuff. And it's out there, and it's really cheap. So how do you become a kid who all of a sudden perhaps is just a regular kid, and maybe all of a sudden you're putting needles in your arm and you're shooting in poison and you're not even sure what it is. You're not sure if it's heroin. You're not sure if it's the next beast that we have coming down our way, fentanyl or even carfentanil, and they're all significantly more powerful than the next. And so what can we do to try to make sure that our kids can make healthy, responsible decisions so that we don't deal with them in the criminal justice system? Because as I was telling the ladies before I started talking, I'm not a social worker. I'm a lawyer. I wasn't trained into this world to deal with significant mental health issues, significant drug issues. But what we find out in criminal justice system right now is when something is ignored in our community, it funnels in to the criminal justice system. So how do we get in front of that, and how do we try to make sure we can help our kids? And our kids today are facing incredible challenges. Whether it be from, in 2008, we had the decriminalization of marijuana here, lesser amounts of marijuana. So now we've got marijuana out there, and kids now think, because of what happened with Question 4, and no matter which way you believed, whether it should be legalized or not legalized, Question 4 itself was a bad piece of paperwork that was put together, and it's putting us all behind the 8 ball right now. I think Hingham here is dealing with it. Other towns in our community are dealing with it, trying to keep the marijuana shops if they want them out. And that's a debate for a different day. But that law, which was now its law, that ballot question, was really a bad piece of legislation that is now being morphed into what's going on and the challenges that we continue to face. So now the kids out there think that marijuana is legal. And so what happened last Friday? 13-year-old kid down in Plymouth made a batch of marijuana brownies and brought them to school. Because it's legal, isn't it? See, even though, DARE's out there right now, it's still out there, it's been there for a really long time. If you talk to any of the school resource officers here in our county, they'll tell you, and you look at the numbers, if you talk to a kid that's been taught about cigarettes and nicotine, you went to a high school right now, kids, for the most part, they're not touching nicotine. But the level of danger of what they think of as marijuana, they think it's lessened. And people continue to think that it's lessened. And marijuana, much like a lot of things that are going on out there, it's not your grandparents' marijuana. It's not the marijuana from the 70s. It's not the marijuana back the Woodstock marijuana. It is marijuana that is out there, that is tainted, that is purer. There's hydroponic. There's better brands that you can get. And when these stores come, and I don't want to get too much into marijuana, but you're dealing with edibles, and you're dealing with growables at home, and things like that, it's going to be a whole new world. And law enforcement's not going to be able to monitor a lot of those issues. And one of the dichotomies that's out there is the fact that marijuana will be legal here in Massachusetts, in the state of Massachusetts, but as I stand here right now, it's still federally illegal. Which is why you can't go to the bank system, which is why out in Colorado, the problem that they had when it got legalized in marijuana, you could grow up to 6 5-foot plants in each house and sell them out of your house. So what was happening is that regular communities, all of a sudden cars would pull up, they'd make a purchase, and they'd take off, just like the drug dealers do in our urban communities. They go up, they buy their drug, whatever it may be. They're not watching television. They're not talking about the Red Sox. Then they're out the door. So now you're dealing with people who are going to buy marijuana at people's homes. And what did I just say? It's federally illegal, so you can't use the banks. So they also know you got cash. So you've got the marijuana, you've got the cash. So in Colorado, I forget the exact numbers, but within the first year, there were 12 fatal armed home invasions. People getting ripped off from their marijuana and getting their money ripped off also. Incredibly challenging. So what can we do about it? Now, virtually every night of the week, there's going to be another fax meeting somewhere, and that's great. Marshfield Fax, Situate Fax, Brockton Opiate Coalition. We have Plymouth and Carver and Middleborough have joined down that neck of the woods. A lot of great things going on. And that's why I'm glad to be here tonight for Hingham Cares, because it's important to have people understand what we're dealing with. Now, Hingham has been really not been dealing with the opiate fatalities per se. There's been one in Hingham this year in 2017. Last year, you had none. But in our county, what we've had over the course of the last few years, we've seen every year but 2 an increase in the number of fatal opioid deaths. And we've seen 2 years ago we had 142. Last year we had 130. Back 5 years ago we were around 45 or 50. And we're watching our numbers go in the wrong directions as kids have gone from using drugs, using whether it be prescription medication that they get because they get sports injuries. You know, lots of kids get hooked on this stuff because they hurt their back, they hurt their knee, whatever it may be. They have surgery. They're given doctors who are giving out way too much medication. And now, at least now there's been some laws that have been changed. We got the physician monitoring program, making sure that they're not giving you 60 Percocet for when they pull your tooth. You don't need it, first of all. Make sure you don't take it. And that's all I ever want to tell the parents is, you know, we have a responsibility to our kids to be parents to our kids. And we go to schools many times and talk about, especially now, it's prom season. I'll talk to kids about, you know, drinking and driving and some of those situations and social host liability of the parents, which is a completely different topic. Because now we go to school so much more in our non-traditional role of trying to get in front of a lot of the problems that are out there. And we will continue to do that. But like I said, the challenges are there. So how do we make sure that we can try to, rather than reinventing and creating the wheel in every community here in Plymouth County, how do we get around that? So 2 years ago, myself and the sheriff got together. We put together the Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force, trying to find out what we could do to enhance our capabilities, to also what can we do to reduce the amount of drugs in our community. It's really important for us to continue to try to reach out through education and prevention for the people who are using these drugs. We have 3 drug courts in our county now. Every district court in the county of Plymouth, excluding Wareham, has one, but I'm trying to get one there also, because I think that we need to hold and help the people that we can help, but also understand that the people who are trafficking in this poison that are not using it, they need to be held accountable. And those people need to be removed from our streets and make sure that they understand that if you choose to sell fentanyl, heroin, opiates, prescription meds, whatever they may be, you are destroying families. And that's what we see. You see the destruction of families because of these drugs. And you see that in court, and you see parents will come up to you and they will say to you, what am I going to do? They don't know what to do. And that's why we're really lucky here in our county to have worked out with a lot of different police departments. And we have, you know, EB Hope was a program that started by Scott Allen and John Cowan over in East Bridgewater, which basically is a drop-in center on Thursday nights, is what it is. And if you have a problem, or if you have a family member with a problem, they have resources for you. And I know when Laurie talked about stigma is still there. People are embarrassed by this. People don't want to come forward with this. So how do you get around the stigma? So what another great, another police officer here in the county of Plymouth started Project Outreach, working here in our county so that now if there is an overdose, The very next day, within 12 to 24 hours, a police officer and also someone else would show up with them, an angel, if you want to call them that, or whatever they are, a helper that can help them get the information. And, even though, you talk to the police about what happens, and if they're at the hospital, if they try to give it to the hospital, people, I don't want, get away from me, don't come to my house. They've never been turned away when they come to a house. Never. Because of this, because you're bringing resources to them, and they're at their wits' end. There are too many people dying from this drug. There are too many people that what we're seeing now, getting back to what my role is, when you deal with cycles of violence, we have cycles of domestic violence, we have cycles of child abuse. And now what I think we're seeing the beginning and the formation of the cycle of drug-endangered kids. We're seeing kids who are losing their parents, and now they're being taken care of by their grandparents. And, grandparents, for the most part, that's great. You had your kids, you've raised your kids, but now, they're your grandkids. You want to drop them off back at home with their parents, right? You want to see them for a while, but they really can't be with you all the time. You're not ready for that anymore. And the finances that are out there, the laws here that the people have to deal with, whether or not somebody's going to try to terminate parental rights because one of the parents may be in a situation where they're using drugs. How do you protect those kids? How do you stop that cycle? That's incredibly important to me. And that's why myself and a number of other people from my office and from these various groups who we're dealing with are going out and talking about the kids who are dealing with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. It's incredibly important to make sure we get in front of this and help these kids, because if we don't, this cycle is going to continue. We're going to continue to have a huge problem down the road. They always give me all sorts of notes and stuff that I go way off track, and I get in trouble with them all the time because I don't touch on the things that I need to touch on. But I just want you to know that, many years back when I first came back to become DA, I was an ADA, assistant DA many years ago, and when I came back into the DA's office, a gentleman came to my office who I knew, and I knew he wasn't a lawyer, and he worked in the DA's office, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Good." We talked for a little bit, and I said, "What do you do here?" And he looked at me and said, he goes, "I'm the director of preventative resources." And I said, that's quite a handle. What do you do? And and for the next hour and a half, I drank out of the fire hydrant because of the fact that the things that we're trying to deal with, trying to get in front of. Our kids now are dealing with internet safety issues. We go to the schools and talk about that. Like I said, we talk about during prom time, we'll talk about a variety of different things. We run a summer dare camp every summer at Whitman-Hanson High School for free for a bunch of kids who may not be able to go there. We use our money that we take from drug dealers and we put it back into the community. We do senior luncheons around our county. We talk about scams. We're trying to get on the front end of things. We have to be more proactive rather than reactive. I think when we do that, we're going to be better off. I think here in our county, we've been incredibly lucky to have a lot of great leaders from our police chiefs and our sheriff who have really worked hard to make sure that we can keep people safe. The prosecutors in my office, they understand where I stand on dealers who are using drugs and traffickers who are selling drugs and hurting our kids. They need to understand that we will not sit back and idly watch that occur. We will go after them, we will pursue them, we will put them in jail. And that's what needs to happen. And on the other end, we need to make sure that we can keep our kids safe. So having said that, I know I'm probably talking too long, bells are ringing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can, or I will pass it off, or unfortunately I can talk forever, and I know that. So I will hand off the microphone to whoever it may be, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And if not, I'll give, yes?
This might not be you, but you mentioned
Yeah.
Programs down that horizon that are sort of more progressive, or what are your thoughts?
I think there was definitely some problems with the DARE program a few years back, and they modified that. As a result of that, they made a lot of changes. I think that any program that we can have that gets school resource officers in school, that kids can develop a relationship with the police officer, they're not scared. Like when I was growing up, if I saw a police officer in my school, I wasn't going up to talk to him. I was going the other way, and I think this develops a great relationship with the kids. And I think them going to classes, that's why you talk about nicotine is something they all stay away from now. That's a big proponent of Dale. They always talked about nicotine and violence, and now our kids are dealing with cyberbullying and a litany of things we never had to deal with. And I think our kids are so inundated now with information, they get it immediately. Everything is, I need information 10 seconds ago. Everybody's got phones, and I always tell parents, listen, you're their parent. You can turn off some of those applications. You don't have to give them a full iPhone 7 and then let them go on anything they want. I mean, everybody wants to be in touch with their kids because things can happen. You get concerned. You want to be able to have a phone call with them. But I think that, you should turn those things off. So I think that DARE has gotten better. I think that, right now in our county, we're going to have I think it's the 21st or 22nd annual DARE camp. And I think this year we're going to have either 22 or 23 towns out of the 27 in the county, which is really, that's the biggest number we ever had. And it's such a great thing. So I think every little bit helps. I think education helps. And I hope that, maybe now we can start tweaking the nicotine stuff with the marijuana also, so that our kids understand that, it's not, we already have medicinal marijuana. You don't need marijuana for, and I think everybody would agree. If you had somebody who had cancer, they had glaucoma, I think everybody would agree with that. But we don't need to have our kids think that I'm going to be 13 years old and make pot brownies and hand them out to my buddies at school. It's insanity, and that's the direction that we're heading. Yes, sir?
Can you clarify what the new marijuana law does make you, or where the misconceptions are?
I was an ardent opponent to that bill, or not a bill, to that question. And I guess the short answer is probably not, because it was incredibly unclear. If you read that 23-page document, it was designed so you couldn't really understand what was going on. So I think anything right now as regards to what they can do and what they can't do, I think they can argue both ways because it was written by lawyers. So I think that you're going to have a challenge in trying to keep out, if you want, because you supposedly have to put on the ballot that you have to opt out rather than opting into this thing regarding selling marijuana in your communities. Some towns have already done that. Some towns have made that challenge. And some towns I know, like East Bridgewater, they will not put it on the ballot because they feel that the town voted for it, therefore they won't. So it gives up the next town election, I think, is a year. So I believe that basically they're going to be in a much different position effective January 2018. It does allow for, obviously, to legalization of marijuana. It will allow for edibles to be made. The gummy bears, brownies, chocolate milk, any candy you can think of. When you walk into those pot shops, when I was out in Colorado, they give you like a clipboard, and you check off on it what you want. And it's, like I said, it's an all-cash business because it's still a federal offense. And individuals you would walk in there and you'd say, okay, I'll take 3 gummy bears. I'll take, 2 of these joints that have boxes, hard plastic boxes of marijuana. And it was all different. It was per gram they sold it to you. And on it would be like, it's almost like going to the gas station. You get low test, medium test, high test, for whatever you want. And the hydroponic stuff is by far the most important, most powerful stuff that's out there. It's also the most expensive. It's the stuff that we see on the streets right now. We've actually had, because heroin is so dirt cheap, and crack and coke, which is still coming back a little bit, you see it every now and then, it's still relatively cheap comparatively speaking. But marijuana, hydroponic marijuana, expensive stuff, and people have killed over it. And I think that will still continue to be an issue. We're still going to have a black market problem. Like I said, you're going to be having people growing weed out of their home, and it's still a federal offense. They can't bank the money. So you're really going to see, and there's not enough cops to go door to door. Because make sure that you're complying with the rules and regulations. It's got to be inside like a foyer or something. You've got to have tax compliance. I mean, come on. I mean, you really think if you can grow 12 weed plants in your house and they're worth like $5,000 a piece, you're making 60 grand cash, you turn that into Uncle Sam? I don't see it happen. I see it as a disaster waiting to happen. And that's even talking about without talking about the consequences of the drug driving and the challenges that the police are going to face. The breathalyzer doesn't work on that sort of stuff. Very difficult to prove that stuff. And in Massachusetts, you can't, when you're trying these cases, you can't talk about refusals of breathalyzers. You can't talk about refusals of field sobriety tests. So all the jury's going to hear, if a smart guy's out there driving his car, he gets pulled over, chooses not to do the field sobriety test, chooses not to do breathalyzer tests, all you're going to hear as a jury, car was driving down the road, was weaving, was pulled over, made observations of John Doe, he had glassy eyes, he had something, an odor on his breath, and I formed the opinion he was under the influence of intoxicating liquor. And the jury's going to be sitting there going, huh? You pulled the guy over for that? You smelled alcohol? You smelled marijuana? Not guilty. They're not going to hear about if they have what their history is. And it's funny when I talk to prosecutors around the country, and we talk about the situations that we find. I was talking to Arizona guys, and they were telling me Are we talking about problems? What's your biggest problem? I said, you know, turnaround time on drugs, turnaround time on DNA, it takes forever. I go, how about you? He goes, yeah, blood extrapolation turnarounds are terrible. I go, what's a blood extrapolation? They said, well, you know, on our DUIs, they call them driving unders, we call them operating unders. That's what you're talking about. So they said, well, in Arizona, you can go get a warrant for somebody's blood. If they don't give it to you, you go get a warrant and you get it. I said, you got to be kidding me. And he goes, yeah, and you can also make sure if they refuse something, you can use that against them in court and say they refuse to do it, so you can infer that there's some consciousness of guilt. I go, really? I go, how do you guys ever lose those cases? They go, we never lose them. How do you do it in Massachusetts? I said, well, we can't talk about the refusals, we can't talk about the field sobriety refusals, or we can't talk about the other things. And he looks at me and goes, how do you ever win? And he's right. And if you talk to any cop out there, they'll tell you the same thing. My time is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Thank you very much for that presentation and for all the great questions. So our next guest speaker is Sheriff Joe McDonald. He was elected in November of 2004. Prior to being elected to the county's top law enforcement post, Sheriff McDonald served for almost 9 years as an assistant district attorney for Plymouth County. Sheriff McDonald co-chairs with District Attorney Tim Cruz the Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force. He also serves as the public safety representative on Governor Baker's Opioid Working Group and the Justice Reinvestment Working Group, and we are honored to have him here tonight.
Thank you, Kristen, for that wonderful introduction. I do, in the interests of accuracy and justice, want to explain, although at common law the sheriff is the top law enforcement official, in general parlance and modern usage, the district attorney, the top prosecutor, is you're welcome, Tim. You heard it here. Now, if he wasn't here, I wouldn't have even mentioned that. But it's a title that we share, and as I've said in many, many occasions, there's no one else that I'd rather share that title with or work with on these very, very important issues to all of our communities. So I want to start off by thanking you all for coming, for being interested enough to come out here and listen to what it is that we have to say. Now, Tim made a great presentation about some of the things that you see on the streets and some of the things that are happening in our communities. I'm a little further downstream in the criminal justice system because sheriffs, although our duties vary a little bit by county and by region of the country, our primary mission, really all over the country, of sheriffs is county-level corrections. And what that means in Massachusetts is if you are sentenced, convicted and sentenced of a felony or a misdemeanor, and the sentence that you receive is 2.5 years or less, you will come to the House of Correction. The difference between the House of Correction and the jail is where people stay prior to their conviction if they're held. A House of Correction is where they would serve a sentence of 2.5 years or less. If that sentence is greater than 2.5 years on a felony or a misdemeanor, that person, or actually, it would be a felony if it's greater than 2.5 years. That person is going to go to state prison. So you hear all these terms probably when you watch the news. This individual is headed to the Plymouth County Jail. He is serving a sentence at the House of Correction, or he's serving a sentence at MCI. And when you hear MCI, that's not the sheriff's office. That's Massachusetts Correctional Institute. That's the Department of Corrections, commonly known as DOC. And that is the state prison system. So Walpole, which is now called Cedar Junction, Baranowski, all those facilities, Concord, those are where people are serving lengthier sentences. But the challenges that we face, no matter what part of the correctional system you work in, are all very similar, because when we see spikes in things like opioid use, we're going to see spikes in crime. Now, ironically enough, as I stand here before you, I was checking my daily counts. I know I receive sheets to tell me how many individuals I have in the correctional facility at any given time. Now, we have one building, so the jail and the House of Correction are in one facility. So I'll know how many people. Now, the numbers that we have had at the Plymouth County Correctional Facility, I've been the sheriff for the last 12 years. I'm in my 13th year. We have been as high as 1,650 people down at the House of Correction in the jail. Those numbers have gone up and they've gone down. But over the last few years, those numbers have trended way down. And that is generally a good thing. I don't know why we're doing that. I like to think it's because some of our rehabilitative programs work, but we do have a terrible opiate problem. Bless you. And one of the things, when I was a prosecutor, and as Kristen said, I did that for 9 years. I worked for DA Mike Sullivan, and I also worked for DA Tim Cruz. And it was a great experience, but I learned a lot. And the first thing that I learned was how little I knew, bless you, when I arrived there. Now, I used to think I had a pretty good handle on when someone would ask me, statistically, how many people do you have serving sentences or being held pretrial who have been charged with drug-related offenses? Well, it's pretty easy. I can look through and I'll see how many people were there for distribution of drugs, how many people were there for the manufacture of drugs, how many people were there. You can quantify those things, and they're very, very simple to do. But as I progressed in my career as a prosecutor and now as the sheriff, I learned that that number really is not the appropriate number to answer that question. It's not that simple. And what makes it not that simple are when you look at the individual stories behind each of those people. Now, I mentioned the numbers. We fell below, this week we fell below 1,000 for the first time since I've been there. There's right about 1,000. There's about 997 or 98 people there. I didn't get the final count, people coming back from court, but that's a significant drop. We've almost been cut in half, which is a good thing. But so many of those people that are serving sentences there, and we have wonderful rehabilitative programs that we operate down there. I invite everybody to come down and visit us at the correctional facility. We do tours. We're very proud of what we do, and I think you'd be very surprised by what you see. So put that in the back of your head if you want to come down. Let us know. And we do school groups as well. So any time. But think for a moment. When you talk to some of these individuals, and I do have an opportunity to do that from time to time, and you hear what the story is, and you realize, you understand that decent people do the most terrible things frequently when they are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Domestic violence, drunk driving. They break into homes, they steal, they rob banks, they rob drugstores to feed that drug habit. They do terrible things when they're under the influence of those drugs. Things that they would never, ever do, but for the fact that they're drug involved. So now, when people ask me that question, it's very difficult to quantify without knowing everybody's story. But my answer to that question is now most people that are in the jail and the House of Correction are there because of involvement with drugs and or alcohol. When I was with District Attorney Cruz, when we were out there, we were campaigning pretty strenuously against that question for the marijuana question. And one of the things that I would tell groups is that in my line of work, I get to speak to a lot of subject matter experts on the topic of drugs, drug use. And I'm not talking about my time on the governor's task force, the opioid working group. I'm talking about my time in the jail. I get to speak to a lot of people who are struggling with substance use issues, people who had become addicted to drugs and done those terrible things and ended up in jail. And when I would talk to them and ask them what their story was and how it is that they came to end up in a correctional facility, we talked about many things, the difficult childhood that they may have had, the fact that they used alcohol at an early age, the fact that they got into drugs when they were young, still in school. And the one thing, although I didn't get them all to agree, we hear, and I think we're getting away from the terminology of gateway drugs, and I know that a lot of people who are pro-marijuana will say, that's one of those buzzwords. So I'll say it because I can't think of a better way to say it, but having, no kid that I have ever met, no person that I have ever met, has said to me that my life's ambition was to be a heroin addict. That's what I want to be when I grow up. Nobody says that. But it happens so many times. And why is that? Well, when you talk to these individuals, they will all tell you, or almost all, that they started with simple things like alcohol and marijuana. So what I would tell people is, having spoken to these experts, I've been able to deduce that while not every marijuana user is going to become a heroin addict, every heroin addict, or most every heroin addict, seems to have started with that. So I'm one of those guys who looks at that evidence and draws my conclusion. And my conclusion, I think, is a pretty strong one, although there are those that disagree, and reasonable minds often do, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. But running a jail, running a correctional facility, has given me a front row seat to the devastating effects that can happen. I served at the governor's request on his working group. That was one of the best experiences of my professional career. I learned so much from so many different disciplines that were there. We were able to take a lot of that knowledge back and start our own task force here in Plymouth County. It's doing some wonderful work. It's not going to be a statewide model. When I hear some of the things that we're able to accomplish when we come together, I think what we're making here is going to be a national model. And I think we're all going to be very proud of that. You may also have heard recently that with those declines in population, the prison populations, we've had some extra space, and it's extra secure space. I worked up a plan, and what I wanted to do was have secure drug treatment, those people that are committed civilly in courts by the judge, to come, because the MASAC, the Bridgewater Treatment Center, was overcrowded, and what was happening was people were getting pushed out before they could complete their programming. So we had space, and when I brought the idea up, a lot of the people that were on the social work side of the house, on the governor's working group, were not so happy with that, so I shelved the idea for several weeks, and I received a telephone call. I was driving in the car to a graduation ceremony for our corrections officers, and the Secretary of Public Safety called me, and he said, "I have a crazy idea." I said, "I'm all ears. What is it?" I like crazy ideas. He said, "What do you think of us taking some of the overflow population from Bridgewater, and instead of pushing them out onto the street after the detox, we put them in your facility to receive treatment in a secure setting?" And I laughed, and he said, "Well, it's not funny." I said, no, I'm not laughing at you. What I'm laughing about is, if that's a crazy idea, I'm as crazy or crazier than you, because I've got it all written on paper and it's ready to go. So a year and a half ago, 2 years ago actually now, we put that all together, we implemented that, and people were with us for drug treatment. And I got a lot of the experiences I had talking to people were talking to those individuals. They were coming from all over the state. That was a great thing, and I'm sad to report that that closed a week ago. Wow. Yeah. Well, we're having some growing pains. The reason that it closed is because the treatment center was moved from Bridgewater to what we refer to as the Forestry Camp. Has anybody ever heard of that in Plymouth? It was a minimum security facility in the Miles Standish State Forest, where guys who were pretty much wrapping up sentences would go. And that was where that program was moved to, including the people that were staying with us. And, you know, I asked some questions and was assured that we needn't worry about, my first, maybe it's the parent in me, it didn't seem secure. And if somebody walks away, they're in the middle of a forest. Well, in the first 2 or 3 days, we had 9 people walk away. Yeah, and then, you know, part of the other reason I wanted to explain to you that we're not MCI is everyone thought it was me, and they were calling me up and yelling at me, and Wasn't us. But I did have some nice conversations with the Secretary of Public Safety, and he is very receptive. We're going to be working with them on ideas. I've got some other ideas that I think might be appropriate. I think maybe what we could have, and I'm going to run this by the Secretary, who is also a very good listener and very receptive, that maybe we could break that into 3 segments. And rather than having people in an unsecured setting, at least at first, have them detox in a secure setting, receive initial treatment in a secure setting, and as they are getting to the end of their treatment, go to that wonderful setting down in the forest. It looks like a summer camp down there. So, and that's probably a good way to do things. And there are people who will disagree with me on this, and I welcome that. I'd love to talk to them. But those are the things that we have going on. And I think the message that I want to convey to everybody here tonight is a message of hope, because I think we are coming to a turning point. On the Governor's Working Group, so many of the things that I learned about that I never thought about, things like the lack of training and education in our medical communities, that the doctors, God bless them, they save lives every day, but for those of us who find ourselves in a situation that, the last thing in the world we should have or could have are those opiates, they were just an easy solution. And now the doctors, the legislation that the governor signed last March, Tim and I were there for the signing. So we had a hand in that legislation, and we're very proud to be part of that. We moved the women's treatment out of Framingham, out of the state prison, which, being in a prison I don't think is an appropriate setting for these individuals. But it does, and it should be, at least initially, a secure setting. There's civil commitments. These aren't criminals that we're talking about. These are they're patients. They're people who need help, because it is a health issue. So I'm in the process of, I learn new stuff every day. I'm grateful for that. And I learn from the most unlikely of sources. I learn from talking to the PhDs and the MDs, but I also learn from talking to the new commitments who come into the jail, and they tell me their story and where the train came off the tracks. So our job as the sheriff, as the corrections at the county level, is to provide those services as best we can to prepare people who have committed those acts, those transgressions, to get them the skills that they need. Education is the most important thing that we can give to those people. And we have a very active educational program down at the jail. So I see that we have some questions. I've gone on. Yes, sir.
My biggest concern with the recreational marijuana situation that's coming on board is the edibles, because I believe that that's less identifiable, and just like the kid with the marijuana going to school on the brownies, these gummy bears and whatever look so innocent. Is there anything related there too that you can speak to?
Well, I share your concern about the edibles, and as the DA mentioned, Friday was a shocker. I pulled, my office is actually next to the Plymouth Police Department, and when I pulled out of the driveway to head home, I saw that every news van was there. So I called my public information person, what the heck is going on? And they had already returned to their home, and they told me that what was going on. The thing about this, and Tim can tell and can speak to this too, when he went to Colorado, I went to Colorado for the National Sheriff's Academy, but that was before all this marijuana stuff came down the pike. But the stores there, and you can look at these lollipops, and they package them in a similar way, so that, you think you're buying a box of Juji fruits, and they're not. You got to read it and say, oh my gosh, look what I just bought. The lollipops, the gummy bears.
Big business, though.
Yeah, it is very big business. And the other part of that, what made the question 4 so problematic is this didn't originate in the legislature. There wasn't a study of this. This was an industry that came in. And imagine if Big Tobacco did this, or the alcohol industry. Hey, we're going to regulate ourselves, so don't you worry about it. And people were tricked into thinking what they were voting on was legalizing marijuana. It wasn't. That was a very small part of this. What it was the regulation of this industry. So we are going to have to, and I say we collectively, the legislature, us, we need to talk to our senators, our representatives, make sure that they understand that this is important to us, and could be a source of great harm. So we need to have laws that regulate this appropriately. Just the tax revenues alone. Thinking about budgets and things in law enforcement, we got our budget numbers recently from the governor's supplemental budget, and they don't look good. So we're going to end up doing the same project we do every year, which is trying to rectify those. So law enforcement budgets everywhere, the DA's office, the police, we're all strained. We're going to do those things, but we need to make sure that the tax revenue is going to at least be able to offset the social costs, because in Colorado they were collecting something like 17 or 18% of a tax, and they were saying that wasn't enough to cover those issues. Massachusetts, we have a sales tax and a little bit of a surcharge, so it's about 7%, 8%, something like that. So it was really a fraction of what it was out there. And then something like with alcohol, we have the ABCC, the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission. We need to also put together the Cannabis Control Commission, and there's no funding mechanism for that. So we're apparently going to have to come together, reach in our pockets, and fund this on behalf of this industry. So I hope that, yes.
Schools and other did a tremendous job of advertising the ills of tobacco, and therefore brought the consumption of tobacco down.
Yeah.
The state has money which they give to grants, to programs like ours and others. Do you think it's saleable that they run a program that shows the dangers of the edibles, so that the kids, and maybe even the parents, so they don't leave this stuff lying around, become educated of just how dangerous it really is?
Absolutely, yeah. And the fact, and Tim mentioned this, touched upon this a little bit, the fact that our kids are so less likely than previous generations to touch tobacco products is what gives me hope as a dad. That's exactly what we need to do. And when we can educate people, what troubles me the most about this is that this has been presented as a medicine. This is good for you. It's a natural thing. It's herbal. It's a wonderful. If some is good, more is better. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So I think you hit the nail right on the head. This is what we need to do. And that's another thing that we need to get on our legislators about. And I think they agree with us. And I have one in the back. Yes, ma'am.
I know Situate Facts did a huge thing on the edibles. There's also, I'm Elizabeth, I'm part of MORE, the Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery. And I've been to like various other towns that are doing a lot with the prevention. I know Franklin County just got a $20,000 grant for prevention from MORE Healy. And so they're totally going to the prevention, and their whole thing around it.
Right.
On a lot on the marijuana and the edibles.
Right, yeah, and that's a good thing, and that's another thing that gives me hope is the fact that there is grant money out there, and we're going to chase that, and that's one of the reasons that the DA and why don't I ask Tim to come up with me, perhaps, because I know you want to chime in on some of these questions, too. One of the reasons that we have our task force is so that we can coordinate our efforts countywide, chasing down this grant money. So rather than having Situate working for the same grant that Marshfield's working for, that Middleborough's working for, that Carver's working for, we work together. And that's the idea. And I think when we start pulling in the same direction regionally, and we are, that we're going to see those numbers trend in the right direction. I'm hopeful. I really am.
We just got a $10,000 grant from Maura Healey also so they had money out, which goes back in. We also, part of the Drug Abuse Task Force is data collection, and we're trying to find out really how bad the problem is, because the problem is much worse than what we know. In light of the fact that we only know about the fatals that occur that my troopers show up to. They show up for every unattended death in the county. But some people survive and they get brought to the hospital. They pass at the hospital. We don't get those numbers. So the numbers are really worse than what they are. So it's important, I think, to try to get the appropriate data so we can also then apply for additional grants, whether they be state grants or federal grants. We have a number of drug-free community grants, which are much bigger money. They can be put back into the community. The Brockton Opiate Task Force, which consists of Brockton, Rockland, Whitman, East. I mix them all up. Well, Plymouth has a different one with Plymouth, Middleborough, and Carver, down there. But we're all working together to get additional monies and resources. And education is such a big thing, and getting on the preventative front. So I think that, we're going to try to continue to do that. And by getting the numbers that we get, we can use that together to work together to get the numbers so that we can get the monies and the resources that our respective communities need.
Now, this young lady.
$1,000 is a drop in the hat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But
I'll take whatever I can get.
That's right. We're going to take whatever we can get. Now, you had a question, ma'am.
About a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
I have an 11-year-old, so my question is, what happens to that child? Are the parents prosecuted, or what would happen in a case like that?
Well, that's a great question, and I want to commiserate with you first off. I have 2 daughters.
Use the oven. I can't imagine.
I know.
Never mind.
I have a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old, so I'm on the front 9 with you. And there can be issues. At the very least, something called the 51A is going to be filed, and Department of Children and Families is going to investigate that. And, I'll turn it over to Tim.
I mean, if you could prove it, and once again, proof's always difficult, you could potentially charge a parent with contributing to the delinquency of a minor, depending upon, right now, a lot of our laws in Massachusetts need to continue to be tweaked, whether they be for internet issues or whether they be for now the marijuana and the drug issues. Our laws, quite honestly, many times we find ourselves pounding square pegs into round holes. They don't fit. And we need to really be much more progressive with, I think, a lot of the laws that need to be changed in the language in there. We have synthetic marijuana issues right now, which is basically synthetic, it's the K2, the spice, the stuff that people were selling, like at 7-Elevens or other places. Incredible, dangerous stuff. They sell it as plant food or something along those lines. It's not for human consumption. Therefore, it gets by the FDA, And so that's what happened there was a Patriot player a couple of years ago that went off the charts right before a playoff game. He's showing up at the police station in January without a shirt on, and he allegedly had been smoking synthetic marijuana. It's poison. And what happens is it's poison, but what happens is now you go after them for that. They change the chemical composition of it, so now it's no longer poison. So now the feds at least have gotten really smart, and they've changed their laws. So now that if it's substantially set up a certain way, chemically speaking, you can still transfer it, so they can't just change it and keep moving the target that's out there. Another huge problem for our kids.
Yeah. Well, I think we have another speaker, so we want to sit. Yep. No, I understand Jill's going to speak. So we're not going to go anywhere, and we'll stay as long as people want to talk. We're happy to do that and answer questions. So having said that, I'm going to get out of the way and sit down.
Thank you very much. So I don't want to start anything between the two of you, but I composed my introduction notes from your websites, from your very own web pages. So on Sheriff Joe's page. So we're very fortunate to have someone who is working on a very local microcosmic level with our young people here at Hingham High School. Jill Jope is an English teacher at Hingham High School, and she is also the teacher advisor to the high school's SAD program, which is Students Against Destructive Decisions. So she will come up and join us next.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you. Oops. Right. Thank you guys. I'm really appreciative of being here. I feel really fortunate to be able to work at Hingham High School and work so closely with the kids. It's definitely very grassroots at the high school in terms of our organization, where the kids sort of determine what issues they want to address and what issues they want to campaign for within our program. So we generally use the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey at the start of the year to determine some problem areas within the school, within the community, and that kind of drives our theme campaigns that we do each month. So it's pretty, it takes the form of sort of being like an educational campaign where the kids are responsible for formulating chapter meetings each month, putting together sort of like a PSA for whatever issue they're addressing. So that could be anything from distracted driving, texting and driving, to skincare and melanoma prevention, which is actually something that's coming up at the end of this month. We have a wide range of topics that we address. So I did bring some information that was significant to the kids that they wanted me to share with you guys. And this was based off of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. They have felt, and the data reflected this, that they're seeing a decrease in reported binge drinking across the board at the high school. But what they are seeing an increase in is the amount of households in which parents are aware that alcohol is being served in the household. So this is, across the grades from 9th to 12th grade. But this survey is administered to 9th graders and 11th graders. So I just think that's sort of useful information to have. So that concerns many of the members, and it also puts that added pressure on them as they are certainly looking for parent disapproval of consumption of alcohol when they're young. I mean, they're dealing with peer pressure from their peers, so it helps when their parents are regularly saying that this is not an acceptable behavior. So what the kids have really proposed doing is putting some peer pressure on the parents and saying it would be helpful, Mom, Dad, for you guys to start putting pressure on our friends' parents so that we don't look like the ones that are the bad guys, but if you guys could be, so not you in particular, of course, but just parents in general. So I really value that insight from the kids because it requires a great deal of emotional maturity for them to see that as sophomores, juniors, some seniors still in the mix, and I want to take that seriously. So we're trying to work on promotional campaigns to get that word out. For example, all junior parents today received an email from Dr. Jared McCann regarding prom for this Friday, and it reiterated that message that we as adults don't have to subscribe to the inevitability myth that all kids drink on prom night. In fact, if we could change that perception of what's going on in our communities, that would be really, really helpful. So that's some of the work that the kids have been up to. And again, I want to give the kids the full credit. I let them off the hook for tonight because it's been AP exams all last week and all this week, and the juniors have their prom this weekend, so everyone needs their nails done and corsages ordered and so forth. So I said, I'll do it. But I'm really so proud of them. I'd definitely like to just share with you some of the partnerships that we've also worked with for the last 2 years that have been amazing. The Save the Life Tour came to see us, and this was sort of a simulation of what it would be like to be under the influence of alcohol and try to drive a car. So the kids got an opportunity to engage with this 3D video gamey type thing, but there was also an impact story that was included as well. And we just recently had 2 great speakers that came to the high school. Colleen LaBelle, I didn't want to forget her name. She is the director at the Boston Medical Center for Office-Based Intervention Treatment, and she helps the kids sort of understand the physiological effects of opioids on their bodies, on their brains, and kind of took the more scientific angle, which they respond to because they're smart and they want to be talked to like adults. And I think that they really appreciated her input and her expertise. And she sort of gave them helpful tips on how to identify behaviors that they might see in their own households and how to have difficult discussions with maybe a sibling, but maybe likely a parent that's struggling with addiction, and how to kind of go about starting those conversations, which for me, sitting back as the advisor and watching it, it made me realize that I would like to sort of institutionalize more in the school access to resources, and how the kids then go from, I know there's a problem, who do I call next? How do I not jeopardize the trusting relationship I have with my parents who I love, or my sibling who I love, but also get them the help they need because I'm only 16, and how do I deal with all these adult things? So that's something that I really want to prioritize as a goal moving forward. And we do have wonderful resources at the high school, whether it's our adjustment counselor, Kevin Lally, or the entire guidance department in general. But the kids would like to organize facilitations in the 9th grade classes, where for 2 days they would go in and provide this kinds of information, access to these resources. But I want to make sure that all my ducks are in a row. I have the right information. I have the expert knowledge from the people that know it best before we do that. So I think we'll spend much of the summer plotting out what those facilitations would look like and getting our resources in place. So I'm throwing that out to you in part So any experts out there, if you have resources, feel free to email me and share any insights you might have. And obviously there's a wealth of information available to me now, even just listening. So we also had a connection with the South Shore Women's Center where a survivor of a drunk driver accident also came and spoke to the kids that same week that Colleen LaBelle came. And she sustained some traumatic brain injury, some spinal cord injury. She was 21 at the time of the accident, and she is now 25. And she was a star athlete, a great student. She really sort of fit the bill for what these kids, their daily lives are like too. And she came and spoke and did a tremendous job. In her presentation at times was labored, and I think that was helpful for the kids to see and really develop empathy for her survivor story and what she has done in all that she's had to do to sort of recover from this injury and from this decision to go out with a friend and get into a car with a friend who was drinking and driving. So those are just a couple of examples of the types of speakers that we have into the building. The HEF, as well as, I'm forgetting the Hingham Partnership too as well. Yeah, they have put on many different speakers in larger scale settings, but I find that if we do them in smaller, more intimate groupings, and we have a speaker that speaks to 3 to 5 classes at a time, we get a lot more traction with the kids. So our group mostly is about 30 or so kids with 4 exec board members who are amazing, and we're hoping to expand the size of that group. We always sort of start off huge in September, and then by December we've got the core group that wants to stay with us. I don't put a lot of requirements on the kids in terms of like, you have to come to every meeting, you have to go to so many social events, because I find that it's been discouraging participation. So we sort of keep like an open door. You come when you can, take an interest in a particular area or theme topic that we're addressing, and if you like it, we'll run with a project that you really want to get behind. So I'm trying to think what else. I wrote myself this long list because they do so much. Two other things that they have been focused on too. Right before vacations and right before holidays, they've been participating in the 21 or Bust campaign, which asks the kids to go into local liquor stores, ask to speak with a manager, ask the manager to sign a pledge that requires he or she to then train the staff and remind them not to sell to anybody that looks under 35. Be safe, just ID everybody. And then they sort of sticker all the coolers. So we've been doing that in Hingham as well as in Norwell, some liquor stores right on 53, and we're hoping to kind of broaden, go into Cohasset and so forth. But they keep doing it, they keep going back in, and the store owners are like, hey, I saw you here a couple months ago, great, we'll sign the pledge again, and they've been really supportive. And one last thing I'll share with you guys, the kids have said that they would like to reward those who are courageous enough to fight the peer pressure and to fight, the urge to drink and to smoke and so forth. And they would like to invite local businesses, particularly ones in downtown, like Brood Awakenings and Nona's, to perhaps extend their hours, maybe even once a month, and discount their coffees and pastries and so forth, to give the kids something social to do on the weekends, and incentivize them with coming in and having those discounted treats and things like that, so that they'll hear less of, I didn't have anything to do this weekend, I was just at home, just to kind of give them a place to mingle around with each other, but relatively supervised and visible to the community. And our SRO, Officer Ford, he also is backing that and is excited to participate in it too. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have about what goes on in the school or concerns you might have, anything. Yeah?
Going back to someplace for the kids.
Yeah.
I know the rec center has programs for young kids.
Yeah.
Well, why can't they turn it up? And it's there. why can't they have a program for the high school kids there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that you want Brood Awakening and the businesses to stay open, but quite frankly, you know, knowing businesses, it's going to be about dollars.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and if the dollars aren't coming in, they're going to say, sorry.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to do, a little informal study to figure out when their slow times were.
We have the facility right here.
Yeah.
You know, can't we get a little extra hours out of somebody to work their facility? And
Yeah, I agree. That's something we've definitely talked about. And also some of it comes down to how do we incentivize the kids to go and to stay? Because we run into that when we've tried to host social events at the high school, where the kids are sort of itching to like leave at 8:30 or 9, and because they have plans of what they're going to do beyond the hours of. So what we sort of always say and sort of put some pressure somewhat on the parents is we're saying, like, don't give them a basement to go back to. Don't give them a space where then after these social events end, they then have this thing that they're looking forward to more. So it's just so tough because I think part of it requires like a real open, uncomfortable dialogue with friends, parents who are providing those spaces for the kids.
you've got the living room here, guys.
Yeah.
Upstairs and, you know, hang out all by yourself.
Yeah. And just being visible, that, I mean, we all know it, but making that the cultural norm would be fabulous. Our SRO, Officer Ford and I were chatting, we were saying we wish we could communicate more and more. We know how excited families get around graduation and around proms, but we also wanted to remind everybody about the fact that it's for the kids. So though it's a social time and you want to have alcohol available for your adult friends or your kids' parents, or your friends' parents, it's not about them. It's just discourage it. Don't have it available. And yeah, it's exactly just modeling. So I'm preaching to the choir.
Julian, I think, just so you know, I did have a meeting with the 2 women that are running the senior night.
Oh yeah.
And, I think it was great to hear. Last year was a great success. There was no issues at all. All the kids came. I think they were expecting to have more kids tonight.
Yeah.
They're constantly giving out that message too about no alcohol, by the parents and the house parties. And I think it's definitely getting out there, and I think it's a positive thing. So
yeah.
And you gave me a real start when you said startle the prom was this weekend, because I'm going like, oh my God, I gotta
yeah, we have
to be and things to do here.
Yep, you do. We have our crash car display coming tomorrow to.
I gotta get my dress. Yeah.
You have to go get your nails done.
No, what I need to do is secure the harbor so that they can all come out there and get their pictures.
Yeah.
Not that problem.
Yeah, you've got it. Nope, that's June 1st. That's the big one. But I mean, even the junior prom, it's gotten bigger and bigger and more. They've sort of dialed it up more in terms of the formality of it. So with that comes, the fact that we have to be extra cautious.
Yeah, the Tom was telling me. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have it, which actually in many ways I think is a good thing. Over the years, we started to see the interest in junior prom peter out a little bit when it was at the school, like at the elementary school. It was sort of anticlimactic. They're in these beautiful dresses, little tuxedos, and they're like, and I'm in the calf of my elementary school. So I think we just sort of...
Actually, we outgrew our school.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, ma'am.
A large class.
Yeah, and I think they're excited by the prospect of having some fancy little snacks, and their dress, it's Gatsby themed, so they're all fresh off reading The Great Gatsby in their junior year American Studies courses, so it's a nice little tradition now. But any other questions or insights I could share, I'm happy to do it.
On the point of changing the culture, several years ago, we had a hard time keeping juniors at the junior prom. And part of it was because parents were having house parties, post-prom house parties, which is fine, except don't start them at 10.
Yeah.
Because kids who were invited to the parties just left.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of parents who were part of our SAD support group
Yeah.
at the time, who were outraged that we weren't like doing this, like literally keeping the kids in the room, which wouldn't be possible to do anyway.
Yeah.
When the real issue was trying to change the culture of, they get there at 9, that's the latest they can come in, and then they're leaving, walking out the door to go to a party at 10,
Yeah.
hosted by one of the parents. So the parents who wanted us to keep them in, who spent a lot of time and money decorating, doing a lot of nice things for kids, were not willing to approach their peers,
Yeah.
who were the ones holding the parties that the kids were leaving to attend.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's still, I think, somewhat there and present. I think by changing the venue, by making it a little fancier, we're trying to almost like treat the symptom of that at times. And even from the teacher's perspective, I've chaperoned so many of those proms and dances. I'll be there Friday. When the kids come over to the door, like, oh, can I leave? We as teachers try to do, I don't know, not yet. We almost just don't give them the straight answer that yes or no. We're like, I'm not sure, get some water. And then it's just discourage them. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, it's 9:48. All right, so that's sort of what we're trying to do too, is just do the deflect, distract move and see if we can keep them in there. But I'm sorry, your hand was up too, Elizabeth.
So you said you do the youth risk survey?
Yeah.
So is it the expert or the craft model? Which model are you guys using? I know that there's the expert, a lot of the schools are supposed to be implementing, is what I heard.
I'm not sure. I'll have to double check with Karen Beatty, who administers it. She always gives us the data, but I'm not sure
A lot of the schools around are they're having their health officials and a lot of their prevention specialists are doing the training.
Okay.
But when you said you were doing that, so I just didn't know which model that.
The one thing I do know about it is that they can input a lot more personalized Hingham-specific questions. So I don't know if that sheds any light on like which one offers that option. So that's the one we're doing. Like we just recently added questions about access to prescription drugs and if you're taking prescription drugs that have not been prescribed to you. And we don't have like the longitudinal data yet because it was just added. But I think it was 26% of students have seen it, taken it, been offered it. So it's definitely something that we're concerned about. And again, the statistics for drinking in a household where there are parents present, it's not like skyrocketing, but we're seeing like a 3% increase over the last few years. And obviously, cumulatively, that's pretty troubling if it keeps heading in that direction. And a increase in marijuana usage too. So that's something that they're definitely concerned about. And something we're also as a group trying to figure out how we address it. The kids have really tried to change the rhetoric of SAD too, so they don't always feel like they're teetotalers, and they want to sort of talk about it more as positive lifestyle choices and doing this for your health and wellness and things of that nature, so that everything doesn't start with don't and no and just kind of changing the language, which I think has been helpful for them. And then, like I said earlier, broadening the scope of what they do. We do stress management, things, melanoma awareness. So all of those things snuck in there is great.
I have to say, I've had the opportunity to go to some of the events, or one of the events they had with all the SAD kids in the whole area that was done. And, if you can get 30 kids.
Yeah.
And the stuff I'm hearing from you is so positive. The kids are actually...
Yeah, they're great. They're nice kids.
Ideas, and they're building on ideas. And, I think we went recently down to the church, and I think there was a kid there by the name of Tommy that spoke, and he was scheduled to be here tonight, but his thing in life was he didn't have some of these things. And I always thought Dot had lost her mind sometimes, because Dot was talking about this yoga program that they do in school.
Yeah,
kids make
it's great.
And I feel like, this is it, Dot's lost it. Yeah, and this kid Tommy, whose life, he grew up in the North Shore, one of the highlights, his father was in jail, so when his father got out of jail, they were able to shoot heroin up together. I mean, you know, you're looking at tough situations, and he actually brought up, he goes, wow, I wish they had that when I was in school.
Yeah.
Because I was one of those kids that maybe if I learned that ability to relax a little bit instead of out, you know, I might have done better in school, my life could have made some difference, but.
Yeah. I think getting them all together too is really crucial in the visibility of it, because I think a lot of the kids feel like they're in their own little silos, like, oh, I'm home and it's Friday and like who else is home, and they're struggling with seeing what they're not doing posted on Facebook and dealing with that and Instagram and so forth, and they have this skewed perception of what they're missing out on. And so having that collection of kids that they're able to be like, oh, all right, you value the same things I do, and just the informality of the meetings of being able to drop in as you please is kind of nice. We have every month Bring a Buddy month, where then you get raffled off for a prize, and there's munchkins at every meeting. There's like, we're trying to do everything. There's munchkins you're in, yeah. That's a great question. It's predominantly female, yeah. And so that's a great question. But we're always talking about that, like we tend to get, we tend to get a lot of freshman boys that sign up, and they come in like a whole posse of them, and then they look and they see all these upperclassmen girls, and they're like, but they're like, I don't know if I can stay here, and so they sort of trickle off. But that's also too where, like, as an advisor, I'm always trying to scout out ones that have that potential to develop a leadership role too, and it's important to have varied perspectives in that room and have different viewpoints and experiences. So.
Well, your whole talk is education with kids, and
Yeah.
it's fabulous, it's wonderful, but it's with the kids now. What do their parents say about this program? That's what I want to get across to some of these parents. Are just like, no, I gotta work, I
Yeah.
gotta do this, I gotta do this and that. And they're just either too caught up in the environment or just caught up.
Yeah.
You know, everything else they're doing it. You know, let's face it, today, it's a lot harder for young kids out there today than it was, 25, 30 years ago. It was like,
Yeah, I definitely, I primarily, I'd say like 99% of the work that I do is just exclusively with the kids. And there isn't necessarily, and that's also probably a product of the schedule, and we have meetings in the morning and then like extension stuff in the afternoon. So I think it's hard to ask a parent to delay going into work and come in for those meetings. But I also feel like you guys are huge assets because you guys are the liaisons.
the point is hard to ask them, but when everything happens to Johnny, then Johnny's all cold and needs to be revived, and he's rushed to the ER, and he'll get the Narcan out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, where did this all happen?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge.
I thought he was with a good group of boys.
Yeah. Yeah, we were discussing the importance of even just getting in your kids' business, being in their stuff. They have campaigns like Hidden in Plain Sight, where it's a tour for parents to go into a room and see the telltale signs of possible drug use. And that's something where it's like you're probably juggling. My kids are so little. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I'm thinking of like how scary this will be down the road. I'm already like trying to wrangle these two little monsters, and I'm like, oh, and I see my juniors and my freshmen, and I'm like, you guys are just a bigger version of my two at home. And how do you protect them and insulate them from all this scariness? But I think like just getting in their business, and sorry guys, but I just have to do it, and I have to know what you're doing and where you are, because I love you. That's why you're in timeout. That's why I say to my son, you're in timeout because I love you.
And they get that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we are so grateful that everyone was here tonight, and I think really it's an expression of what Hingham Cares is. It's prevention, it's recovery, it's treatment, it's all of those things. And please use Kristen and I this summer. I'd love to brainstorm ideas on where kids can go that are looking for that, and also how do you reward kids that are, the Heron Project has it's the Project Purple, and it's all across the country, and these kids pledge to be substance free, and they get all kinds of things through the Heron Project for that. So it's something to look into. But you certainly have our support. We'd love to meet with you, and so thank you everyone for coming. Any other questions before we end? Tommy was supposed to come tonight and share his recovery story. He had a work conflict. He was so upset he couldn't come, but he will be back. And then over the summer, we're going to be, really brainstorming on some of the events we want to bring and forums we want to bring up for the upcoming school year, and really trying to have an agenda set for our September meeting for the whole year, rather than trying to figure out what we're going to be doing on a monthly basis. So with that, thank you so much for coming.